Now let's turn to the ongoing debt ceiling negotiations. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says talks went better yesterday than they did on Tuesday, but that there are still plenty of lingering issues the two sides have to work through. Those comments came as House Majority Leader Steve Scalise announced yesterday that members would be allowed to go home for Memorial Day weekend after today's votes. However, they must return within 24 hours notice if they are needed to vote on any debt limit bill. That announcement was met with criticism from House Minority Whip Katherine Clark, the Democrat, who called on Republicans to sign on to the Dems' discharge petition for a clean increase that has been signed by their entire caucus.
I don't know how my colleagues across the aisle who voted for the Default on America Act are going to look our veterans in the eye this Memorial Day. With an impossible choice, devastating cuts or devastating default, hungry families or homeless seniors, kids without classrooms or parents without jobs. Join us, sign the petition, stay here and fight for American families, fight for their American security.
Joining us now, congressional correspondent for the New York Times, Luke Broadwater. Luke, good morning. So talk to us at the latest of these negotiations. What sticking points remain, and has progress indeed been made?
Well, the biggest sticking point that remains is really they have to agree on the first top line number. Republicans want the Democrats to spend less money. They want the government to spend less money and the Democrats to agree to it than the current spending. And that's been a non-starter for the White House. There's inflation in the country, costs go up every year, and to spend less money than the year before would mean, in the Democrats' view, very deep cuts to important programs that everyday Americans rely upon. And so they're not, that has to be agreed to first before anything else before the details can really get worked out. But some of the things that have been on the table, as you put on the screen, are, there's been talk of spending caps going forward. I think that's one thing that we would likely see in any particular deal. The Republicans wanted capped at 1% growth per year, which over 10 years would be about $3.6 trillion less spending by the federal government. There are other talks about things like permitting reform, about work requirements, but all of those things have to be agreed to only after they can get a top line spending number agreed to.
Now, certainly the politics of this would be devastating for both parties were the nation to default, and both sides suggest the other would take more of the blame. But let's just simply, is there enough time to avoid this? There was some chatter yesterday that really they needed to come to an agreement yesterday, no later than today, in order for the process to play out, for the House to have enough time to review and vote. What do we think, Luke? Are we going to get there?
Yeah, I think those are really valid concerns. In some ways, this is a game of chicken. It's a game of political chicken with real devastating impacts. And for a game of chicken to work, the two cars need to be very close to colliding until somebody swerves or backs down. And we're getting very, very close to that moment. And, if you look back at debt limit crises in years past, sometimes it did actually have to wait till there was a downgrade in the credit rating, or there was an actual impact in the stock market and people started to lose jobs before there was a deal reached. So, I think everyone's sort of holding out hope that it won't get to that moment where we do see real tangible impacts on people, where we see people start getting laid off and losing jobs. But unfortunately, for Washington to act here, it may be that we need to see some real pain in the American economy before somebody will back down.
Yeah, and those warning signs starting to appear. And later in the show, we're going to have an in-depth look as to what it actually would mean globally and for Americans individually if the nation were to default. Congressional correspondent for the New York Times, Luke Broadwater, thank you so much for starting us off this morning.